see it your way. No way, gasoline and propane. More flames, oh no, no more snowflakes. We can all get along, but there's no stopping. Ay, everybody's wrong, that's a real problem. Ay, they don't want to hear it, but they still talking. Ay, soon enough, we running out of options. Ay, this ain't gonna end till it's in the coffin. Ay, we ain't gonna be friends till we try to squash it. Ay, I don't know how we can make amends or we drop it. Snowflakes melt when it's hot, kid. Y'all are so fake, oh no. The forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa, you can make us see it your way. No way, gasoline and propane. More flames, oh no, no more snowflakes.
Oops, there we go. Do we hear me now? I think I was muted. That's so funny. Anyway, I'll go again. Amária Sweet with HeartMind Expressions and the Fab Four. I got Alex with me today. Sue, we're hoping is gonna come and visit us pretty soon. So anyway, Alex, we were just chatting about the schism of 2016. I'm hoping I'm saying that right.
Yes, you actually are.
Wondering, how did you come to this schism, and maybe explain a little bit to the audience. I think it's really interesting what he's talking about.
Yeah. So back, I know many times on this show I've talked very politically about things. That's mainly because I've had a very interesting political life in the last 10 years of my existence on this planet. And the normal thing I will say to people is, if they ask me how I got involved or what did I do, usually, most people say, oh, I got involved because of family and they brought me in to help door knock and stuff like that. My general response to that is, well, I just kind of stumbled into it. I didn't intentionally want to do this stuff, but it just kind of, fate kind of follows you and just kind of taps you on the shoulder like, oh, okay. And I just fell right into it. Anyways, all that back history aside. So the greats, this is a term I just made. I don't know if anybody else has. I know if people have mentioned things like this, but I believe that was a huge schism after, during and after the election of 2016. Now, this is mainly political, but it will also include things like metaphysical and spiritual in this. I think there are a lot of different things that are involved, as we're noticing. A lot of different realms of and disciplines have kind of coalesced with one another. So it's kind of almost it's kind of hard to discern the different things. But basically, what I'm trying to say is, in 2016, and a little bit earlier before that, you had people who were clearly defined as one particular group, right? As we know here in the U.S., you have your your main parties, Democrat, Republican. And what was so interesting about 2016 was that it was the first time where you had two really, dare I say, radical or outsider candidates that were really basically saying the same thing, but were doing it from a totally different angle. Okay, so like your mainstream candidates in a lot of these things was, for the Dems, it was Hillary Clinton. And for the Republicans, it was people like, for example, Ted Cruz or Jeb Bush. But you had your outsiders like Bernie Sanders on the Democratic Party, and then you had Donald Trump on the Republican side. And it was very interesting considering that one of these outsiders got basically lambasted and destroyed by their party. And the other one also got lambasted and destroyed by the party, but then started controlling the party and then eventually became president. At any type of topsy-turvy world, you're kind of tipping your head like, I thought the outsider doesn't do that stuff.
Right.
But here we are, that happened, and everyone's just at this point has schismed, and I'm using that term quite literally when I say that, fractionalized into different camps. Okay, there is no unified Democratic or Republican Party anymore. You have different camps.
Yeah, it's really weird.
It's very similar to if we wanted to use this more in a religious aspect, right? It's this difference between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, or the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, right? You had one singular ideology for the most part that majority of people followed, or two ideologies that most people followed, but there was a flashpoint that eventually just caused such a massive splintering off, right? And that's exactly what we saw back then, and it's still happening to this day. I think both parties are so fractioned off that there is no such thing as a Democrat or Republican Party as we know it today. I think it's see, this is the reason why I kind of am in favor of a multi-party Congress more than say two parties, because when you have one or two parties, then you're putting all your eggs in one basket, or you're making a one size fits all system that doesn't work, right? I mean, there's a difference. Like if you were in in the UK, right? You have Reform UK, you have UKIP, and you have the Conservative Party, and they all are basically right-wing parties, but they represent completely different things, or they deal with different policy points. Versus the Republicans, which are supposedly the right side party, but there are people who are more right than the platform. There's people who are more left of the platform, you know. But I mean, honestly, what we really need is what I think the funniest thing in the UK is their joke party. Okay, there's a joke party in the UK, and it is it's called the Raging Loonies Party. And so the whole purpose of the Raging Loonies Party in the UK is to produce joke candidates.
Oh wow!
And so they'll run, and they're usually in costumes, and they usually have this really outlandish platforms that they have. Like I believe one was that if a bureaucrat wants to have a salary that's over £100,000, they have to play a game of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire to earn their salary, or something, you know, of that kind of absurdity.
Wow.
But here in the U.S., our way I'm looking at it, we were at two parties, but now we are at, conservatively speaking, there's the pun. Conservatively speaking, I can see four, two on one side, two on the other, or we can even go even more technical. We can even say there's 10 with 5 on one side, 5 on the other. But I'm not going to go into that specifically. I mean, that's not why we're here. If I wanted to give that specific, we can make a seminar for like political science or something like that. That's not why we're here. Right. This is just basic idle conversation more than anything else.
I always find it fascinating, just your perspective. And even my son, Paul, he actually, I'm trying to remember what kind of anarchist he is. He's always trying to teach me all these little...
Oh, I was anarchist at one time.
And well, it's interesting, some of his stuff. I keep trying to see if he would call in.
Let's see. So before the schism, I was what you call an anarcho-syndicist.
Oh, so what
Which
is that? Pray tell.
an anarcho-syndicalist believes in that the destruction of the state as a governing, the getting rid of the state. Now, that's different than the government. The government is a political body. The state itself is everything that the government is part of. All right. So to destroy the state means that you want to completely dismantle any type of governance whatsoever from a higher authority, and it being relegated to a kind of a group of people together cooperatively. Now, the cynicalism in this aspect means that you wanted the economy to be much more collectivist, kind of like, say, it's similar to saying anarcho-communism or anarcho-socialist in that aspect.
Right.
But there are so many different types of anarchos.
But it's really crazy how many there are. I mean,
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
just still like, wait, what the crap?
Well, let's see. You have anarcho-primitivism, which believes that we need to go back to basic things because the way we are running things is not the way humanity was designed to run things. You have anarcho-monarchism. Like, how does that work? Anarcho-monarchism? Monarchism? Like, how about, here's another one. Anarcho-communism. Oh, wait. The idea of communism is for the state to own property. How can the state own property, but you also want to not have property? I mean, not have the state. Oh, there's also things like ANCAP or anarcho-capitalism. That's actually feasible because basically what you're saying is that you don't want the state to have any involvement within the economy itself, and everybody, there's a complete free market, not like a regulated market. Like everything is on the table, and I mean everything. See, that one can work. I'm not saying it's going to be the best for everybody, but it can work.
I always think it's interesting to hear what other people have to say about government. Because I know, like, I think structure helps. Just, being a parent and having had children, when you have so many people involved, it's good to have some sort of structure. But I like the idea of having a balance with that structure to also have, there's some protection for people, but we also need to take, our own responsibility for things and protect ourselves and know the government and know how to use it to be able to benefit ourselves. Yada yada. Anyway.
I completely agree. I've used several different things to define myself personally, depending on who I'm talking to and what situation we're talking about.
Right.
Like, if I'm talking to somebody who's much more anarchist, I will say I consider myself a minarchist.
What is that?
A minarchist is somebody who believes that the state should be as small as feasibly possible, creating what's called a night watchman state, where the only purpose of the government is to do basic tasks that a single person could not do.
I think that's fair enough.
So that means there would be no military, there would be no taxes, there would be none of this. The only job of the government basically would be to represent the people. And that's basically it, right?
So as far as like
let's say if you're
military protection or whatever.
So militias would be organized independently of themselves, kind of like how there is already militias. Like you'll have like your Utah or New Jersey freestanding militias, something like that.
Nice.
You have just regular paramilitary groups out there, and that would be considered a organization outside of government. So we wouldn't have, say, a professional military in that aspect. The only major downside to that is what happens when you have an actual organized nation invading, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's different. It's not 1776. You just can't have militias anymore. I mean, heck, we had to have several countries, including France and Spain, come and help us because our guerrilla tactics were really working so well.
Jeez.
In fact, we lost more battles than we won until they had help from the French, because then were able to organize into a semi-professional army, which means that we can actually fight British almost on even standing, notwithstanding that we've had quite a few less people. But yeah, so minarchist. Then I also use things like constitutionalist or classically liberal or Jeffersonian.
Right.
You know,
I know
or
I stand with a lot of those beliefs. I'm trying to think what my son had put a label, and it fit pretty well. I mean, I still have those Jeffersonian desires, I guess. I don't think I'm phrasing it very well. But
what's that? I
oh,
missed
shoot.
that.
Oh, just the Jeffersonian liberal.
So Jeffersonian, or would also be considered the core roots of the Democratic Republicans
Right.
of the late 1800s into the 1900s, which actually they were in control of the United States government for an unprecedented amount of time. They were able to destroy the Federalists, which was the party of, say, John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. The purpose of so Jeffersonians believed, in the most part, of an agrarian culture, right? They didn't like heavy industry. They believed that that the nation was best suited as small knit communities that dealt with their own individual needs and then moved from the bottom up, rather than having one national government that did everything from the top down. And that actually worked. It worked for a very long time. I think we had Democratic Republican presidents for, I think, let's see, you had Adams, you had Madison, you had Monroe. I think a few others. But you're talking at the very least 20 to 25 years of just Democratic Republican rule. And they controlled both houses for the most time too. So a lot of their policies just were able to get done. Like when Thomas Jefferson got the Louisiana Purchase, which was completely unconstitutional, that didn't matter because he had both houses of Congress, and they were okay with the idea of expanding land. So
I'm trying to think some of the other explanations for people that are listening, just to kind of think of like different political standings or lack thereof.
So one of the ones I think is generally misunderstood is the term classically liberal. Because we're not saying, when you go to classically liberal, we're not talking about the modern democratic liberal platform. Nor are we also talking about libertarianism. A classically liberal person is somebody who believes in a idea of small government, low taxes, and at the same time having the understanding and recognizing the idea of natural human rights.
Oh yeah.
So like when they say we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, promote for the domestic tranquility, et cetera, you know, that preamble, that's basically a mantra for the classically liberal. You know, the idea that we have a creator, and we have been given these inalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that any other person who may be trying to take away from that is basically doing themselves they're basically being wronged in some shape or form. Like, you can't deprive a person of these things because they are just innately given to us. They're not given to us by a government. They're given to us by creator. Exactly. It's basically talking about the universal rights that we talk about when it comes to this world of the spiritual. Except it's been done in such a way where it's enshrined in a political document, which that's one of the reasons why I'm really fascinated with the Constitution as where it was when it was written.
Right.
Because let's be honest, the original Constitution, the one for the Articles of Confederation, kind of sucked.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, some things that could be put together that could modernize it.
Oh yes, that was actually the whole purpose of it originally. Jefferson even mentioned that it should have been updated every 15 years to deal with the situations of the nation at that time.
Oh yeah. Well, and we have so much, I think, a different perspective these days, especially with the technology that we have.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And I think another issue we have is that we have all these assumptions of what this actually means. You know, it's wonderful for people to say, well, this is what that meant. But I'm sorry, none of us are mind readers. And as much as somebody might have documented in writing, that may have not been what they originally intended it like 250 to 300 years ago.
Right. Well,
Right.
and human rights that have actually been, I guess, practiced in the past 20, 30 years, thank God, are better, but they could still improve.
Yeah, like I think what's really interesting about this is the fact that we're all against slavery, but there is no fine line when we talk about things like human trafficking. Right? Slavery, chattel slavery is illegal, right? You just can't have somebody and document that you own them, right? Like there is no census there. That's the thing. There used to be a census, and they used to say this landowner has this many slaves, right?
So
they don't have that anymore. There is no government ledger that says all these things. Everything is actually far less regulated than they were before. And I'm not embracing slavery at that when they had it back then. But the only upside I can possibly see was at least at the point it was fully stated that it was there.
Yeah.
It was completely overt for the most part. Now it's incredibly covert, and the conditions are even worse than they were before.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think there's more slaves now than there were back then. At any point.
The worst thing about a lot of the slaves is they don't realize that they're slaves. They think that they've got freedoms when really they don't. They just have a carrot dangling in front of them that keeps getting pulled out away from them. And so they keep chasing that dream, but it's not quite educated into the point of success, I guess, if that's for better or worse words.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Right. And I mean, and that was the whole purpose of they were talking. I remember earlier this year when they were talking about Juneteenth.
So
and
I'm still trying to figure out this Juneteenth thing. What the crap is it?
So this was something. So I actually was very angry when I heard that they were trying to institute this as a national holiday, which it now is. It's a national holiday. It's June 17th. My issue with it was that I was talking about it was the day that they freed the slaves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not true. Okay, that was the last time that we had. It was the time when the state of Texas or the Republic of Texas, or I forgot what they actually called themselves at that time, because they weren't a state of the United States at that time, but they weren't also a republic because they actually had their own government for a few years. So Texas recognized the freeing of slaves. Okay, but the problem is that it wasn't recognized nationally, right? There were still places that had slaves afterwards. Actually, I believe there were places actually here in New Jersey, a free state, where we still had slaves in
I think
Bergen
Missouri
County.
and Arkansas were also states that did that as well. Maybe Louisiana as well.
Exactly. There were places that still had it. but it wasn't overtly stated.
Right.
So I always believed that the better name for it would have been Freedom Day.
Oh yeah.
Which is what it's called internationally. You go to other places, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Barbados, Antigua, other parts of the Caribbean which dealt with the Colombian slave trade. They all call it in some shape or form Freedom Day. I'm like, why don't we just call it Freedom Day?
Yeah, that makes more sense to me.
It's kind of like how Mother's Day is international or Father's Day is international. We just use the international term.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't do that because it deprives us from American history. I'm like, no, it doesn't. If you go to the place where they even celebrate the holiday, they call it Texas Freedom Day. So we're arguing with the place that already has it, and if that's what it's called,
I suppose.
Oh no, it actually has a longer term name for it. Actually,
Wow.
1 second. I actually got it. I now want to actually remember what the actual name is. Juneteenth National Independence Day.
Here.
It's also known as Jubilee Day, Emancipation Day in Texas, Freedom Day, Black Independence Day. Really? Why do we have so many different names for the exact? Let's call it Freedom Day. All right. It's the date which the Western world believed that the idea of chattel slavery was reprehensible and morally wrong.
Right.
I mean, doesn't get any more simple than that. Now we have to give it a name and talk about how is Black liberation. Not really. I mean, personally, I would make it more of a federal holiday when the 15th, 16th, and 17th Amendment became law. Or, became amended to the Constitution. I think that would be more important.
Right.
Which, gave Black Americans the right to vote. It gave them the right to personhood, right? And it also gave them the right to association. They didn't have that before. And I think that would be intensely important to talk about how much we have advanced as a culture.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about that. I mean, it's also kind of unfortunate because that also didn't include things like Native rights.
True.
I mean, Native rights really didn't come until the 90s, surprisingly.
Well, and there's still a lot of stuff that's buried that's very frustrating for tribes. A lot of women that are still being abducted, murdered, raped. It's just, and they're not even being looked for. It's like the government turns a blind eye. And it's really sad that that's happening. That's anybody that's not familiar with what it represents, I guess, the freeing of those people, those women, is the Native that's basically stripped down and has the red face paint over the mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad because we know that there's a lot of that still going on in a lot of areas, that trafficking, that murder. Very, very sad.
Yeah. Like I've had this idea for a while that I know probably other people have had this, where I think that it's only fair that we have a lot of these Native tribes and have a path for them to be not under the Department of Native Indigenous Affairs, I believe it's called, but to be recognized as its own sovereign entity.
Right.
Right. Kind of like how the Cherokee Nation has been trying to do that.
Exactly.
And I think Navajo have been trying to do that. And there's a few others. I think the Sioux have been trying to do that as well.
Lakota. The
Lakota.
Sioux is a government name, and it's really not recognized by the actual natives. But Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota are the three different offshoots of that tribe.
Okay, so the Lakota, Dakota, I completely agree. I mean, they believe that they need to be offered the ability to be completely sovereign and separate.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of them have had their own government for a long time.
Or, I mean, at the very least, have it be its own autonomous region. Kind of like how we do stuff with like Puerto Rico in that kind of same way, where they do a lot of stuff by themselves and we just kind of just there for basic assistance, but let them basically run their own affairs outside of that. Like,
right.
hey, you have your own way your cultures or tribes run. You know,
Right.
let there just be some type of correspondence between the two of us. But besides that, if you don't need our help, no problem. That's how that's kind of how I am with a lot of things, not just native and tribal rights, but just people in general. You know, you could do whatever you want so long as it doesn't break the law or harm somebody. I'm pretty much fine with anything.
Right.
And I think that's, you know, I think there needs to be more of an idea of personal responsibility, because we're constantly talking about how other people should be doing things for us.
Yeah, I think that there has been a lot of lax with a lot of people just expecting to be, have some sort of a handout or just feeling entitled when, you got to really put your mind to something useful, something that's beneficial for society. Otherwise, it just always implodes. You can't keep feeding off of each other, expecting things, but not giving back. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So I don't know how I got this. How I was talking about schism and went all the way into civil rights and stuff like that. It's very interesting. See, that's what's happened. This is the problem. Well, this is a problem. It might not actually be a problem when you think about it. We weren't actually talking about these things before.
Right.
You know, now we're actually. It's kind of. It's a schism, but it's also brought almost like a new renaissance of ideas again. Like, it's perfectly fine to start talking about these things again. Before it was kind of like, why are you bringing that up? It's not important.
Yeah, I think people are kind of wanting to tap back into their roots a little bit.
That could be kind of difficult for me.
Yeah.
I am such a mutt that
That's funny.
I mean, like there's I don't know if I mentioned this, but there's a family saying that we have, and it's that we got kicked every sane country in Europe. Because, I can name about 15 different countries that I have some type of ancestry towards.
That's awesome.
But, I mean, I tend to kind of lean toward two of them, mostly.
Nice.
One of the ones I'm very proud of having was Polish. I have Polish on both sides of my family. And the other one, which I got maternally through my grandfather on my mother's side, is Sicilian.
Nice.
But here's the thing. I call it Sicilian. I don't call it Italian. They're two different things.
Right.
In historical and contextual reasons. Right? So like the difference between an Italian and a Sicilian is an Italian is usually referring to someone who is of mainland in Italy, right? Sicilian is only Sicily, and they've had two completely different histories between the two of them.
Cool.
So Italy had the Romans, they had the barbarians that went through it, the different Germanic tribes.
Right.
They had the multiple different nations in Italy, like Venice, Florence, Genoa. And then eventually they unified. And also the Papal States, obviously. I mean, we can't forget about the Pope. All right, I forgot about Papa. Italian word for Pope, by the way, if you didn't know that. But then you have Sicily. Sicily was initially, from the earliest memories that we have, is that they were colonized by the Phoenicians through the Carthaginians. They were eventually conquered by the Romans. Once the Romans lost them, then you had the Muslim the different Muslim
Wasn't that like the
cultures.
Moors?
Was that?
Wasn't it like the Moors?
No, the Moors were actually in Spain. They were in
Oh,
Iberia.
okay. So that was like Spanish Muslims.
No, I mean, so this would be more, I believe, Mameluke than it was Moorish, because Moorish was more Moroccan.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm just trying to like get the stuff all straight in my head.
So Sicily would be more connected to, say, the different Muslim cultures that eventually took over places like Libya and Egypt.
Okay.
So they were a little bit different. But then after that, what happened? Then you had them conquered again by the Italians eventually afterwards. And then you had them self-independent at one time. You had the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. So, I mean, they've had their own independent history. It's only recently that they actually joined up with Italy. And funny enough, we talked about Texas. We've also talked about Sicily. There's a really interesting connection between the two of them. Do you want to know what that is? Okay, so in the Texas Constitution, state constitution, and in the constitution or compact that Sicily has with Rome, they both say that they are legally allowed to leave the nation. So for any reason whatsoever, they do not need to have approval.
That's cool.
They both can leave, and it's because they both have their own governments that have ran independently. Thus, they recognize their own independent sovereignty. So,
Cool.
like for example, the Republicans in Texas have said, "Hey, we should succeed and have our own government again." So you would see the Republican of Texas again, which that's actually where the term Six Flags actually comes from.
So funny.
Because there have been Six Flags that have flown over Texas. 6 different nations in one point or another.
So crazy how a lot of this history I've forgotten, because I used to have to take that, because I was born in Texas and went to school till about the 4th grade. But then we moved to Kansas, and then I went to Arkansas, and then over to Utah and Idaho. So I didn't really finish remembering a lot of that history.
Were you? You were a military brat, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
I was wondering why you moved around so much, because my mom was moved around quite a few times because my grandfather was in the Army.
Oh yeah, we had a lot of the branches in my family: military spouse, brat, about everything, and then SSP to boot.
Oh, jeez. We don't even have to get into that. That's a whole different can of worms in itself right there.
There's another set of rabbit holes.
But yeah, I mean, so just to like answer that, the Six Flags that have flown over Texas, right? You had Spain, you had the Republic of Texas, France, the United States, the Confederate States of America, and then I believe also, there's another one. France, Spain, the United States, Republic of Texas, Confederate States. I forgot that 6th one. Damn it.
I know, it's been so long. I'm just like, wait, what was it?
I think it has to do with something with native. Okay, so here we go. It's the Republic of Texas, Spain, France. The one I forgot, Mexico.
Oh, right.
So it was France, Spain, Mexico, the United States, the Confederate States of America. There you go. Because Texas in Spanish is Tejas. Right. That's actually where it gets its name. It's actually a anglified version of Tejas. And it was much bigger actually when it came in. We just had to do a little choppy chop so we could just kind of like crop it a little bit, so it wasn't all over the Central Plains. And that Panhandle was a lot bigger when we
Yep.
first had it. It was huge. I mean, we thought it was. We think it's huge now. Before it was even bigger.
Right.
I mean, if they had to do the same thing with Utah, though, at the same time, right? Utah was supposed to be this huge thing called Deseret,
Oh, true.
and it had to be chopped down pretty significantly so that it had to respect certain borders and other arbitrary reasons.
True.
And now this huge thing that was going to cover most of the Pacific Northwest is actually relatively tiny in West Coast states. I mean, now you have Greater Idaho. That's going to be
Right.
interesting. You've probably heard about that. There's Greater Idaho. Yeah. So I think with I'm kind of like going to move from tangent to tangent. So pardon me.
No, you're good.
But so Greater Idaho, there's this movement that's happening in Idaho, which basically is trying to make it so that it can move the state border into which is currently in Oregon.
Oh, interesting.
And so you have so if you look at a map, a political map of Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're in the neighborhoods of Portland, Salem, or Eugene, in that general area, which is the northwest section of Oregon,
Right.
that's the main area that's basically ruling the rest of the state, which is much more sparsely populated. And they tend to vote more conservatively than Portland, which has a habit of burning itself down all the time.
Yeah, lately.
I mean, I can only hear the stories. I mean, Dr. Bloom lived in Portland before he moved down to Florida.
Right.
And so I could only imagine what's happened down in Main Street, Portland. Especially when you see the videos of down there, I can only imagine it's even worse in person at times. But anyways, so back to the original idea. Greater Idaho is going to work is basically all those conservative counties in Oregon are voting for the most part to secede from Oregon and join Idaho.
Oh, wow.
So you have this huge bulge to the west. And the idea was to go all the way to the Pacific Ocean from Idaho, South Idaho, all the way through. It didn't happen because we had several counties over there that said, we don't want to do that. But still, you have this huge chunk of land. It would make Idaho have, I think, 3 more Congress people and 3 more electoral votes.
Wow.
So it would be a huge jump. And I think and Oregon would lose, I think, 1 electoral vote.
Wow.
So as big as that is, it's going to lose only, I think, 1 or 2 electoral votes, which is minuscule considering what it's, because the bulk of its population is in Portland, Eugene, and Salem.
True. Too funny. Well, interesting topics. I like kind of getting into the nitty-gritty and educating people on old school shit that a lot of people just don't know, or those of us that just haven't remembered in a long time. It's always good to brush and all that jazz.
Yeah.
I'm hoping Sue's doing okay. Unfortunately, didn't get to join us, but
well, thank you for letting me tangent for a short period of time. There's a lot of useless information. I'd probably be a horrible partner in pub trivia.
nah, I like it. It's interesting facts. I think kind of changing things up and just doing stuff like this. Nice casual conversation. I think people enjoy that. So it's been fun.
I just like talking about things that are a little bit more niche.
Right.
Because, we can only talk about the weather and how things are going. Let's not talk about what's actually how did we get here? It's one of those things where people are like standing next to each other and you're like, oh, that's how we got here.
I like
we
that.
Screwed up badly, didn't we?
Kind of go by the flow. Well,
yeah.
I guess we'll keep going by the flow. A lot of, I guess, My brain is just shutting down right now. I've been working a lot of hours. But
I
I
know.
want to reach
I
out,
know.
do some plugs really quick, and thank a lot of our hosts, C4OC Radio Network, Rev Radio Las Vegas. We appreciate you guys being on the air, and Kamara Holistic Connections. So grateful to Katie Kamara. She's just busy, busy, busy mom and working and school and everything, and still
Thank
busting
you, Katie.
that amazing brain of hers. She's awesome. I'm very inspired by her. Thanks so much, Alex, for coming on again. It was, like I said, a nice, interesting chat. I think it's fun to get into these conversations and
If you ever want
learn.
to have, well, thank you for letting me have this Spielman spiel. Yeah, if you ever want to do this again sometime, let me know. I have a whole other can of worms we can open up, and I can talk forever. I mean, that's what the word spiel means. It means to talk.
Just keep bringing on those cans of worms, yo.
Well, I mean, if I work in a supermarket, I'd be surprised I can't sell it at the shop.
So
Anywho, thank you
well,
again.
thank you so much. You guys have an amazing evening. Happy holidays and tons of love.
Have a good one. We'll see you guys next time.